15 engineers failed, but the poor delivery girl arrived and said to the millionaire, "Don't sign this." Marcus felt her stomach drop. She delivered coffee to enough corporate meetings to recognize the sound of something illegal being planned. But this was different. This was massive. What dreams have you put on hold to survive? Hi, viewers. Kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. The delivery girl's hand shook as she held the coffee order that would either save or destroy a billion-dollar empire. 15 engineers had failed, where one minimum wage worker from Atlanta was about to succeed. But what Richard Cole didn't know was that the woman clutching his morning coffee held the key to exposing the betrayal that would have cost him everything. What would you do if your entire fortune hung in the balance, and salvation came from the person you'd never notice? Have you ever been overlooked because of your job, your background, or your zip code? Have you watched powerful people make terrible decisions while you held better answers? Corporate America is built on a lie. That wisdom only comes with wealth. That truth only speaks through titles. Stay with me as we discover how one voice changed everything, and why the person holding your coffee might be holding your future. Hit that like button if you believe talent doesn't need a title, and drop a comment telling me about a time someone unexpected changed your perspective. This story began 3 weeks earlier, when Marcus stepped into a Houston boardroom for the first time. But before we go there, let me paint you a different scene. The glass towers of downtown Houston were reflecting the morning sun like golden mirrors. Inside the biggest building, 15 of the city's smartest engineers sat around a mahogany table worth more than most people's houses. They'd been working for 72 hours straight, and they had nothing. Zéro solution. The merger documents sat ready for signing, and billionaire CEO Richard Cole was about to lose half his empire. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. She clutched her third job application of the week, knowing that even if she got all 3 positions, she still wouldn't make enough to move her mother out of the neighborhood where gunshots counted as white noise. Marcus Williams had been running on 3 hours of sleep and gas station coffee for the past month. At 24, she looked older. Houston's heat and her own exhaustion had carved lines around her brown eyes that shouldn't have been there for another decade. But when you're working 3 jobs to keep your family afloat, time moves differently. The glass towers of downtown Houston stretched above her like monuments to everything she couldn't reach. Each window represented wealth that could change her life forever. But Marcus walked past them with her eyes down, invisible in her faded delivery uniform that smelled like French fries and disappointment. Another day, another dollar, she whispered to herself. The same lie she told every morning. It wasn't even close to $1. After gas, uniform cleaning, and the phone bill that kept her connected to delivery apps, she barely cleared minimum wage. But her mother's medication wasn't going to pay for itself. The coal industry's building loomed 43 stories above her. She delivered to every floor except the top 10. Those were reserved for people whose monthly salary exceeded her yearly income. People who made decisions about thousands of jobs while sipping coffee that cost more than her lunch. Marcus pushed through the revolving door, her worn sneakers silent against marble floors that gleamed like mirrors. The security guard nodded. He knew her face by now. 3 deliveries a week to this building, always to middle management, never to the executives who actually ran things. "Morning, Marcus." Tony, the security guard, smiled. He was one of the few people in this building who treated her like a human being instead of a convenience. "Got the usual for the 19th floor?" "Actually, today I'm going up," she said, checking her phone. 39th floor. Executive assistant ordered coffee and pastries for some big meeting. Tony's eyebrows shot up. 39th? That's almost the top. Big shots having a rough day up there from what I hear. Marcus should have asked what he meant. Should have been curious about the tension that had been crackling through the building's expensive air for weeks. Instead, she just nodded and headed for the elevator, thinking about her mother's prescription refill and whether she'd have enough gas money to last until Friday. As she entered the coal industry's building with her first delivery of the day, Marcus had no idea The conversation she'd overhear in the elevator would make her question everything she thought she knew about power, money, and the price of silence. What dreams have you put on hold to survive? What would you do if you had her intelligence, but her circumstances? Tell me in the comments below. The elevator doors closed, trapping her with two executives who spoke about destroying lives like ordering lunch. Marcus pressed 39 and stepped back, making herself as small as possible in the corner. The two men in $1,000 suits didn't even glance her way. To them, she was furniture with legs, useful for carrying things, invisible for everything else. Just make sure Cole signs tomorrow, the first man whispered. His voice carried the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. By the time he realizes what we've done, we'll be long gone with our golden parachutes. The second man laughed, a sound like breaking glass. 15 engineers couldn't solve the problem because there was no problem to solve. Beautiful, isn't it? Create the crisis, offer the solution, pocket the profits. Marcus felt her stomach drop. She delivered coffee to enough corporate meetings to recognize the sound of something illegal being planned. But this was different. This was massive. The merger papers are ready, the first man continued. Coal Industries absorbed by Meridian Corp for half its actual value. Richard Cole loses everything. We split $20 million in finder's fees, and nobody's the wiser. What about the workers? What about them? Meridian will cut 70% of the workforce within 6 months. Not our problem. The elevator's mirrored walls reflected Marcus's shocked face as the men discussed millions in stolen profits like pocket change. They looked right through her, never seeing the danger in underestimating someone with nothing left to lose. Ding! 29th floor. The doors opened and Richard Cole stepped in. Marcus had seen him in business magazines at the grocery store checkout line. Photos didn't capture the way he filled a room just by existing. 6'2", dark hair touched with silver at the temples, and blue eyes that seemed to see everything. The kind of man who'd never noticed someone like her in his entire privileged life. But when those blue eyes met hers in the elevator's reflection, something shifted. He saw her, really saw her, for the first time. Not just the uniform or the coffee she carried, but the person underneath. The intelligence she tried to hide, the exhaustion she couldn't mask, the strength that kept her moving forward when everything else wanted to hold her back. The two conspirators fell silent, their expressions shifting to fake smiles and respectful nods. Morning, Richard, the first man said. Ready for the big meeting? Richard's gaze lingered on Marcus for another heartbeat before turning to his board members. More ready than you think, gentlemen. When Richard Cole's eyes met hers in that elevator, Marcus realized she held information that could either save him or destroy her own chances of survival. Have you ever witnessed something that made you question staying silent versus speaking up? What would you risk to do the right thing? Share your thoughts below. She had 48 hours to choose between a paycheck and a conscience, until she discovered a merger would destroy more than just one man's empire. Marcus barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard those voices in the elevator talking about $20 million and 70% workforce cuts. She kept thinking about the security guard Tony, who had 2 kids and a mortgage. About Maria in accounting, who always smiled when Marcus delivered her afternoon coffee. About the hundreds of people who worked in that building, people with families and dreams and bills to pay. People just like her. Her cramped apartment in Houston's 3rd Ward buzzed with the hum of an overworked air conditioner. Case files and news articles scattered across her kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle she couldn't ignore. She'd spent hours researching Meridian Corp, and what she found made her sick. They were corporate vultures. They bought struggling companies, stripped them for parts, and sold to pieces. Every merger left thousands of people unemployed and communities destroyed. The kind of destruction that turned neighborhoods into ghost towns. Her phone rang. Mama. Baby, you sound tired. Her mother's voice carried the weight of her own exhaustion. You working too hard again? Marcus looked around her apartment. At the bills stacked on the counter, at the medical prescriptions she couldn't afford, at the acceptance letter from community college she couldn't attend because she needed to work instead of study. I'm Fina. Mama. How you feeling today? Doctor says the new treatment's working, but her mother's pause spoke volumes. Baby, I know this is hard on you. All this money for my medicine, all these jobs you're working. Maybe it's time to. Don't. Marcus cut her off. Don't even think about giving up. We're going to figure this out. But how? Even with 3 jobs, she barely scraped by. And now she was sitting on information that could save thousands of jobs or destroy her own life. Because people like her didn't challenge people like Richard Cole's board members. People like her stayed quiet, kept their heads down, and survived. Except survival felt like cowardice when you knew silence would hurt innocent families. She pulled up the news article again. Cole Industries, Houston's largest private employer, 12,000 jobs, 12,000 families, depending on paychecks from the company those men wanted to destroy. Her phone buzzed. Text message from unknown number. I know what you heard in the elevator. We should talk. RC. 3 words that shouldn't have made her heart race. But everything about Richard Cole was dangerous territory she wasn't prepared to navigate. Marcus stared at the message until her screen went dark. Then she made the decision that would change everything. Whether you had to choose between your safety and your values, between keeping quiet and speaking truth to power, drop your story in the comments. She agreed to meet him in neutral territory, a diner where power suits looked as out of place as her delivery uniform did in boardrooms. The Starlight Diner sat on the edge of downtown Houston, the kind of place where night shift workers grab coffee before heading home and early morning commuters fueled up for another day. Neon lights cast pink and blue shadows across cracked vinyl booths, while the smell of bacon grease and strong coffee created a barrier between the working world and the corporate towers visible through smudged windows. Marcus arrived first, choosing a corner booth where she could see both exits. Old habit from a neighborhood where being aware of your surroundings wasn't paranoia. It was survival. She ordered black coffee she couldn't afford and waited. Richard Cole walked through the door at exactly midnight, and every conversation in the diner stopped. Not because anyone recognized him, but because everything about him screamed money. The perfectly tailored shirt that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. The watch that caught diner lights like trap stars. The way he moved through the world, expecting it to step aside for him. But when he slid into the booth across from her, his expensive cologne mixing with the diner's working-class atmosphere, something unexpected happened. He looked nervous. "Thank you for coming," he said, and his voice carried none of the authority she'd expected. "I wasn't sure you would." "I'm here," Marcus said simply, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug for warmth and courage. "But I don't know why." Richard studied her face in the diner's harsh lighting. Up close, she could see the exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes, the weight of responsibility that bent even broad shoulders like his. "You could have ignored what you heard in the elevator," he said quietly. "Why didn't you?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Marcus thought about all the safe answers she could give, about how she could minimize what she knew, protect herself, walk away from this dangerous conversation, and back to her safe, small life. Instead, she told him the truth. Because some things matter more than keeping your head down. Something shifted in Richard's expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition of something he hadn't expected to find in a third ward diner at midnight. "Those men," Marcus continued, leaning forward, "they're planning to steal your company and destroy 12,000 jobs. You know that, right?" "I suspected," Richard admitted, "but I didn't have proof." The engineering reports all said the same thing. Unsolvable problems. Merger was the only option. 15 different teams, 15 identical conclusions. Because the problems were fake, Marcus said. They created the crisis so they could profit from the solution. Richard's jaw tightened. "You understood all that from one elevator conversation?" "I understand a lot more than people think," Marcus shot back, and for the first time in the conversation, her voice carried an edge. "Just because I deliver coffee doesn't mean I can't think." "I didn't mean," Richard started, then stopped. "You're right. I made assumptions. I'm sorry." The apology surprised them both. When was the last time someone with his power had apologized to someone with hers? As they talked, Marcus found herself drawn into the conversation despite every instinct telling her to run. Richard asked for her thoughts on the engineering reports, and she found herself explaining patterns she'd noticed, inconsistencies that had bothered her. He listened, really listened. Not the way people listen to service workers, waiting for them to finish so they could get back to important things, but the way you listen to someone whose opinion matters. When he walked her to her car in the diner parking lot, his hand accidentally brushed her arm. The electric shock of contact made them both freeze. "This complicates everything," he whispered. She should have agreed. Instead, she found herself leaning closer. Have you ever felt instant connection with someone from a completely different world? When chemistry defies logic? Tell me about that moment in the comments. She told herself it was just one kiss, until she realized some lines, once crossed, redraw the entire map. The kiss happened in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, under fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry insects. Not romantic, not planned, just two people who'd spent their whole lives in different worlds, suddenly discovering they spoke the same language. When Richard's lips touched hers, Marcus felt something she'd never experienced. The sensation of being seen completely, wanted entirely, and respected absolutely all at the same time. His hands framed her face like she was something precious, something worth protecting instead of something to be used. "We can't do this," she whispered against his mouth, even as her hands pulled him closer. "I know," he said, but he didn't step back. "This is impossible. Completely impossible," she agreed, and kissed him again. The next week changed everything. Richard started requesting her specifically for deliveries to coal industries. Not because he needed coffee, because he needed to see her. 10-second conversations in hallways. Brief touches when she handed him his order. Glances across crowded lobbies that lasted longer than appropriate. Marcus found herself taking different routes through the building, hoping to catch glimpses of him. Her delivery uniform had never bothered her before, but now she was painfully aware of how it looked next to his $1,000 suits. How her worn sneakers sounded against his marble floors. But Richard didn't seem to notice the differences that screamed at her. When he looked at her, she saw something that made her chest tight and her hands shake. She saw respect, admiration, one that had nothing to do with convenience and everything to do with the person she was underneath the uniform. A week after the diner, he asked her to stay late. "I need your opinion on something," he said, leading her to his corner office after the building had emptied. The view from a 39th floor spread Houston out like scattered diamonds on black velvet. But Marcus wasn't looking at the city worth billions. She was looking at Richard, who was looking at her like she was priceless. "The engineering reports," he said, spreading documents across his desk. "I need you to look at them. Really look. Tell me what you see." Marcus studied the papers, her mind working through technical language she'd picked up from community college classes she couldn't afford to finish. The patterns jumped out at her immediately. Deliberate inconsistencies, problems that didn't match the proposed solutions, numbers that had been manipulated just enough to hide the truth. "They're lying," she said simply. "Every single report. The problems aren't real, but the solutions are expensive. Someone's getting paid for every consultant they bring in, every emergency measure they recommend. That foundation," she continued, "it's going to be funded by the reward money the SEC pays for exposing corporate fraud. $20 million that was supposed to go to corrupt board members is now going to go to communities like ours." The night before the stockholders' meeting, they received an envelope containing photos, documents, and recordings that would expose corruption reaching far beyond coal industries. But using the information meant declaring war on Houston's entire corporate establishment. When have you seen invisible people wield incredible power? When have the underestimated surprised you with their strength? Share those stories below. She walked into that stockholders' meeting not as Richard Cole's guilty secret, but as his secret weapon. The coal industry's auditorium was packed beyond capacity. Shareholders filled every seat while reporters lined the walls with cameras and microphones. Community activists held signs reading "Workers Before Wealth" and "Justice for Houston." The air crackled with tension thick enough to cut. Marcus stood backstage in her best thrift store blazer, the navy one with the safety pin covering the stain, and tried to steady her breathing. Through a gap in the curtains, she could see the crowd. Suits that cost more than her rent, sitting next to work uniforms that smelled like honest sweat. "You ready for this?" Richard asked, straightening his tie. For the first time since she'd known him, he looked nervous. "Are you?" she shot back. He smiled, and it was the kind of expression that had probably closed million-dollar deals. "I've got the best partner in Houston. I'm ready for anything." The word partner sent electricity through Marcus's chest. Not girlfriend, not affair, partner. They walked onto the stage together, and the auditorium exploded. Cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters shouted questions over each other. Shareholders muttered and whispered and pointed. Richard approached the podium first. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. 3 weeks ago, this company faced what appeared to be an unsolvable crisis. Today, I'm here to tell you that crisis was manufactured by corporate criminals who have been arrested by federal agents." The crowd erupted. Cheers from the community section, gasps from shareholders, frantic note-taking from reporters. "But this meeting isn't about what almost happened to coal industries," Richard continued, his voice carrying over the noise. "It's about what's going to happen next. It's about a new model for corporate responsibility in America. And it's about the woman who made it all possible." He gestured to Marcus, who felt every eye in the auditorium focus on her like spotlights. "Marcus Williams didn't just save this company," Richard said. "She showed us that wisdom doesn't require wealth, that intelligence doesn't need a title, and that the people we overlook every day might be the ones holding the solutions we desperately need." Marcus approached the microphone, her worn sneakers silent against the stage's polished wood. The auditorium fell silent except for the hum of recording equipment. 3 weeks ago, I was nobody," she began, her voice steady despite the way her hands shook. "A delivery girl from Third Ward who worked 3 jobs and couldn't afford college. The kind of person you look through instead of at." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the crowd. "But being invisible has advantages. You see everything. You hear everything. And eventually, you understand everything." A reporter in the front row leaned forward, hanging on every word. "You want to know what's wrong with corporate America?" Marcus continued, her voice growing stronger. "It's not that poor people want handouts. It's that rich people stopped listening. It's not that communities are failing. It's that companies abandon them. It's not that workers are disposable. It's that executives forgot that profits come from people." The community section erupted in applause. Several shareholders looked uncomfortable, but they were listening. "Today, that changes," Marcus said. "Coal Industries is announcing the largest investment in worker justice in Houston's history. $20 million, the exact amount corrupt board members tried to steal, will fund community centers, job training programs, and educational opportunities in neighborhoods corporations have ignored for decades." She looked directly at the cameras, knowing her words would reach far beyond this auditorium. "But we're not stopping there. Every company that partners with Coal Industries will be required to meet new standards for worker treatment, community investment, and corporate transparency. We're changing the rules of the game." The applause was deafening. Marcus felt Richard's hand find hers behind the podium, his fingers intertwining with hers in front of hundreds of witnesses. "Some of you will say this is impossible," she said, her voice carrying over the noise. "That business and community can't mix. That profit and people are enemies. You're wrong, and we're going to prove it." The vote was unanimous. Richard retained control, the corrupt board members resigned, and Marcus became the new vice president of community relations. But celebration ended when they discovered the real threat wasn't corporate greed. It was personal revenge. When have you had to speak truth to power? What gave you the courage to stand up in front of people who wanted you to stay quiet? Share your brave moments. Defeating corruption in public was one thing. Surviving the private war that followed was something else entirely. The first threat came disguised as a congratulations card. Marcus found it slipped under her apartment door 3 days after the stockholders' meeting. Pink envelope, flowery handwriting, her name spelled correctly. Inside, a greeting card with puppies on the front, and a message that made her blood freeze. Congratulations on your promotion. Shame about what's going to happen to your mother. No signature, no return address. But the photograph tucked inside the card told her everything she needed to know. Her mother leaving the dialysis center, walking to her car alone, completely unaware she was being watched. Marcus's hands shook as she called Richard. "They're targeting Mama," she said without preamble when he answered. "Who's targeting her?" "I don't know, but they know where she goes for treatment. They know her schedule." "Richard, they have pictures." The silence on his end stretched so long she thought the call had dropped. "Pack a bag," he said finally. "Both of you. Now. I can't just." "Marcus." His voice carried an authority she'd never heard before. "Cold. Dangerous. Pack a bag. I'm sending security to pick you up. We're moving your mother to a private facility where she'll be safe." "I can't afford." "I can, and I will. No arguments." Within 2 hours, Marcus and her mother were in a luxury medical suite at Houston Methodist Hospital, surrounded by security guards who looked like they ate bullets for breakfast. Her mother's new room was bigger than their apartment, with a view of downtown Houston and medical equipment that hummed quietly in the background. "Baby, this is too much," her mother whispered, sinking into a hospital bed that probably cost more per night than Marcus made in a week. "I don't need all this fancy stuff." "Yes, you do," Marcus said firmly. "Someone wants to hurt you to get to me. That's not happening." Her mother studied her face with the kind of perception that came from raising a daughter alone in Third Ward. "This man you're with," she said quietly, "he's changing you." "What do you mean?" "You're standing taller, fighting harder. You always had strength, baby, but now you got something else. You got backup." That night, Marcus stayed in the hospital room while her mother slept. She sat in the reclining chair beside the bed, listening to machines monitor heartbeats and breathing, thinking about how quickly her life had changed. A month ago, she was invisible. Now, people wanted to destroy her family, to hurt her. The second threat came at sunrise. A brick through the window of her apartment, wrapped in newspaper. The headline had been circled in red ink. "Local woman's mother dies in suspicious accident." The article was fake, dated 3 days in the future, describing a hit-and-run accident that hadn't happened yet. But the details were specific enough to be terrifying. The intersection where her mother usually caught the bus. The time of day she typically ran errands. Even the color of the dress she'd worn to last week's doctor's appointment. Marcus called the police, but the detective who took her report looked at her like she was paranoid. "Ma'am, this is just a fake newspaper article. Could be a prank. Could be someone trying to scare you." "Someone is trying to scare me," Marcus said. "That's the problem. But no actual crime has been committed. No specific threats made. There's not much we can do until my mother gets killed." The detective shrugged apologetically. "Until we have evidence of an actual crime." Marcus left the police station feeling more alone than she had since this whole thing started. The law couldn't protect them until after someone got hurt. Corporate justice was apparently easier to find than personal safety. Her phone buzzed. Text message from unknown number. "Pretty hospital room. Expensive security guards. Too bad they can't be everywhere all the time." Attached was a photo of her mother's new room, taken from outside the window. 43 stories up. The final attack wasn't against Marcus or Richard. It was against the community center they'd funded, the symbol of everything they'd built together. The fire started at midnight, and by morning, everything had changed again. How far would you go to protect someone you love? What lines would you cross if someone threatened your family? Tell me in the comments what justice means to you. They burned down her community center, thinking they'd destroy her spirit. Instead, they ignited something unstoppable. The call came at 3 in the morning. Janet Rodriguez's voice was tight with controlled rage. "Marcus, turn on channel 11. Now." Marcus fumbled for the remote in her hospital chair, her mother still sleeping peacefully in the bed beside her. The local news filled the screen, and her heart stopped. The Third Ward Community Center was burning. Orange flames licked 50 feet into the Houston sky, while firefighters battled an inferno that had already consumed half the building. The reporter's voice provided details that felt like physical blows. The fire appears to have started in multiple locations simultaneously, suggesting arson. This facility, which opened just 2 weeks ago with funding from coal industries, served over 300 families in the Third Ward community. Marcus watched her dream turn to ash and smoke on live television. The computer lab where kids learned to code. The meeting room where adults practiced for job interviews. The kitchen where Rosa taught cooking classes to single mothers. All of it gone. Her phone exploded with calls and text messages. Richard, Janet, Maria from accounting, Tony the security guard. Voices offering condolences that felt like funeral prayers. But the voice that mattered most came from the hospital bed beside her. "Baby," her mother said quietly, "look out that window." Marcus turned to see something impossible. At 4 in the morning, in the middle of a Tuesday night, Third Ward was waking up. Porch lights flickered on. People emerged from apartments and houses, some still in pajamas, others pulling on work clothes. They were all heading toward the community center. "They think fire stops us," her mother said, struggling to sit up in bed. "They don't know Third Ward." By sunrise, the crowd had grown to hundreds. People Marcus recognized from the neighborhood, from coal industries, from every corner of Houston's service industry. They stood in a semicircle around the still-smoking ruins, not mourning, but planning. Someone had set up a folding table. Someone else had brought coffee and donuts. Maria, from accounting, was taking notes, while Tony, the security guard, sketched building plans on a napkin. Marcus arrived to find Janet Rodriguez interviewing Rosa, who was explaining in rapid Spanish and broken English how the community was going to rebuild. "We build it better," Rosa said firmly. "Bigger, stronger. These people who burn things down, they don't understand. Every time you knock us down, we get back up madder." The news crews that had come to film tragedy found something else entirely. They found resilience. They found community. They found a story that spread beyond Houston, beyond Texas, beyond anything Marcus had imagined possible. By noon, donation pledges were pouring in from across the country. A tech company in California offered computers. A construction firm in Atlanta volunteered free labor. A group of teachers from New York sent lesson plans and supplies. But the moment that broke Marcus's heart and rebuilt it simultaneously came when Richard arrived. He didn't come in his expensive car with a security detail. He came on foot, wearing jeans and work boots, carrying a toolbox that looked older than he was. "My grandfather was a carpenter," he said simply, setting the toolbox down beside the ruins. "Taught me that sometimes the best way to handle a problem is to build something better in its place." The crowd that had gathered to mourn turned into a construction crew. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years worked side by side. Corporate executives in $1,000 suits swung hammers next to delivery drivers in worn uniforms. Marcus stood in the middle of it all, watching her community and Richard's world merge into something entirely new. The insurance investigation revealed the fire was professional arson, but the evidence pointed to someone they'd never suspected, someone who'd been part of their inner circle from the beginning. Well, have you seen destruction become the foundation for something better? How do communities heal and rebuild? Share your stories of resilience below. The worst betrayals come from those closest to your heart, but the deepest love survives even the ultimate test of trust. The knock on Marcus's hospital room door came at 8 in the evening, 2 days after the fire. She expected another security guard, another update from Richard, another reporter wanting to interview her about the community rebuild. She didn't expect to see Janet Rodriguez standing there with tears in her eyes and a manila folder clutched against her chest. "We need to talk," Janet said quietly. Privately, Marcus glanced at her mother, who was dozing in the hospital bed, then followed Janet into the hallway. "I know who's been threatening you," Janet said without preamble. "I know who ordered the fire. And Marcus, you're not going to like it. Just tell me." Janet opened the folder, revealing photographs, bank records, and phone logs. The evidence was damning and heartbreaking in equal measure. "It's Maria," she said softly. "Maria from Coal Industries Accounting." Marcus felt the world tilt sideways. "That's impossible. Maria helped us. She provided evidence. She's been fighting beside us from the beginning. She's been playing both sides, Janet said. Look at these bank records. Weekly payments from shell company linked to Morrison and the other corrupt board members. She was their inside source the entire time. The evidence was overwhelming. Maria had been feeding information to the conspirators, helping them stay one step ahead of the investigation. But more than that, she'd been the one tracking Marcus and her mother's movements. She'd been the one providing addresses, schedules, medical information. The fire, Marcus whispered. She knew exactly where to hit us. She knew the community center's security codes. She knew when it would be empty. She knew it would hurt you more than any physical threat. Marcus sank into a hallway chair, feeling betrayed in a way she'd never experienced. Maria had sat in her mother's hospital room, had held Marcus's hand during the stockholders' meeting, had smiled and called her brave and strong, all while planning to destroy her. There's more, Janet said gently. The threats against your mother, the fake newspaper article, the photo from outside the hospital window. All of it traces back to Maria. But why? Marcus's voice cracked. We trusted her. We included her. We made her part of the team. Janet sat down beside her. $22,000. That's what the board members paid her over 6 months. To someone working payroll at minimum wage, that was enough to make her betray everything. Where is she now? FBI arrested her an hour ago. She's confessed to everything. Corporate espionage, arson, conspiracy, terroristic threatening. She's looking at federal prison for the next decade. The confrontation happened the next morning in the same boardroom where their story had begun. Marcus stood across from Maria, separated by a conference table that suddenly felt like an ocean. Maria looked smaller somehow, diminished. The confidence that had made her such an effective ally had crumbled into shame and regret. Why? Marcus asked simply. My daughter needed surgery, Maria said, not meeting her eyes. Insurance wouldn't cover it. I was desperate. You could have asked for help. From who? Rich people who throw charity at problems? I wanted to earn the money, not beg for it. Marcus felt her anger crystallize into something cold and hard. So you decided to destroy my family instead. I didn't know they would go that far, Maria said. The threats, the fire, I thought they just wanted information. You thought wrong. The bailiff stepped forward to escort Maria away, but she turned back one last time. I'm sorry, she said. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Marcus watched her former ally disappear through the courtroom doors, feeling hollow and betrayed and strangely relieved. With the betrayer exposed and their enemies defeated, Marcus and Richard faced their biggest challenge yet, figuring out what they wanted their victory to look like. How do you rebuild trust after betrayal? What makes love stronger? Never being tested or surviving the test together? Share your thoughts on forgiveness and healing. They'd won the war, but now they had to win the peace, and that meant deciding who they wanted to be when the cameras stopped rolling. 6 months after the fire, the new Third Ward Community Center rose from the ashes like something from a dream. Solar panels gleamed on the roof, casting rainbow reflections across walls painted with murals depicting Houston's diverse communities. The building was twice the size of the original, with computer labs, meeting rooms, a commercial kitchen, and a child care center. But the real change wasn't in the building. It was in the people who filled it. Marcus walked through the halls on a Tuesday morning, clipboard in hand, checking on programs that had grown beyond her wildest imagination. In the computer lab, teenagers learned coding from software engineers who volunteered their evenings. In the meeting room, adults practiced job interviews with HR professionals from coal industries. In the kitchen, Rosa taught cooking classes to packed audiences who came as much for her stories as her recipes. Miss Williams, a voice called from behind her. Marcus turned to see a young woman about her age, wearing scrubs that suggested she was between shifts at one of the nearby hospitals. I wanted to thank you, the woman said. 6 months ago, I was working 3 minimum wage jobs and could barely afford rent. The job training program here helped me get certified as a medical assistant. I just got hired full-time at Houston Methodist. Stories like that had become routine, but they still made Marcus's chest tight with emotion. The community center had become more than a building. It had become a launching pad for dreams. Her phone buzzed. Text from Richard, conference room. 5 minutes. Bring coffee. Marcus smiled. Even as vice president of community relations, she still brought him coffee. Some traditions were worth keeping. She found Richard in the building's main conference room, but he wasn't alone. Janet Rodriguez sat across from him, laptop open, recorder running. "Sit down," Richard said, but his tone was warm, not businesslike. "We have something to discuss." "Are we in trouble?" Marcus asked, settling into a chair with her coffee. "The opposite," Janet said. "The community center model you two created is being studied by cities across the country. Detroit wants to implement it. Atlanta's interested. Los Angeles has allocated $50 million to replicate your programs." Marcus felt her breath catch. $50 million? That's just the beginning, Richard said. "I've been in talks with other CEOs who want to partner with us. We're looking at a nationwide network of community centers funded by corporate profits and managed by local residents." The implications were staggering. What had started as a single building in Third Ward could become a movement that transformed how corporations engaged with communities across America. "There's something else," Richard continued, his voice softer now. "The success of the community center has changed coal industries in ways I never expected. Employee satisfaction is up 40%. Productivity has increased. Stock prices have hit record highs. It turns out that caring about communities is good for business." Marcus looked around the conference room, at the windows overlooking the neighborhood where she'd grown up, at the table where they'd planned their revolution, at the man who'd seen her potential before she believed in it herself. "So what happens now?" she asked. Richard reached across the table and took her hand. "Now we decide what comes next. Together." The word "together" still sent electricity through her chest. They'd built something bigger than either of them could have created alone. A partnership that balanced her street-smart wisdom with his corporate resources, her community connections with his business expertise. As they stood on the community center's rooftop, looking over the neighborhood that had raised her and the city that had tested them both, Richard pulled out a small box that had been waiting for the right moment. "What does winning really look like in your life? How do you build something lasting after surviving something difficult? Share your vision of success below." 2 years ago, she delivered his coffee and he barely noticed her existence. Today, she was about to deliver her answer to the question that would define their forever. The proposal happened on the rooftop of the Third Ward Community Center, with Houston skyline glittering in the distance and the sounds of evening programs drifting up from below. Children's laughter from the after-school program. Adult voices from the job training sessions. The steady hum of a community that had found its voice. Marcus had expected something elaborate. Richard Cole had the money and resources to arrange proposals that made headlines. Private jets to Paris, flash mobs in Times Square, orchestras playing on the steps of City Hall. Instead, he dropped to one knee on the same rooftop where they'd watched their dreams burn and rebuild, holding a ring that caught the last light of a Texas sunset. "Marcus Williams," he said, his voice steady but his hands shaking, 2 years ago, you walked into my world and changed everything. Not just my company or my business. You changed who I am. You made me see that real power doesn't come from wealth or titles. It comes from lifting other people up." She felt tears on her cheeks as he continued. "You taught me that love isn't about rescue. It's about recognition. It's about seeing someone's strength and helping them see it too. You didn't need me to save you. You needed me to stand beside you while you saved yourself." The ring was beautiful, but not ostentatious. A single diamond surrounded by smaller stones, elegant and strong like the woman it was meant for. "So I'm not asking you to be mine," Richard said, echoing words he'd spoken on a different rooftop 2 years earlier. "I'm asking if we can be each other's. Equal partners, building something neither of us could create alone." Marcus looked down at the man who'd seen her worth before she believed in it herself. The CEO who'd learned to listen to voices that had been ignored for decades. The partner who'd stood beside her through corporate warfare and personal attacks and the slow, difficult work of building something lasting. "Yes," she said simply, and the word carried 2 years of growth, struggle, and love. The wedding reception 3 months later filled the community center's main hall, string lights twinkling above faces that told the story of their journey. Rosa from the cleaning crew sat next to software engineers from California who'd flown in to celebrate. Tony, the security guard, danced with his wife, while Janet Rodriguez interviewed community members for her book about corporate transformation. Marcus's mother, healthier now thanks to the best medical care Richard's money could buy, sat at the head table wearing a dress that made her look 20 years younger. "I told you he was different," she whispered to Marcus during the father-daughter dance. "But baby, you changed him just as much as he changed you." The house they moved into after the wedding wasn't Richard's downtown penthouse or Marcus's third-ward apartment. They'd chosen a home in the neighborhood where she'd grown up, close enough to walk to the community center, spacious enough for the children they planned to have. Children who would grow up understanding that love sees no boundaries, that wisdom comes from unexpected places, and that the most powerful transformations happen when people choose to see past differences and build something together. The final scene of their story happened 2 years after the wedding, when Marcus stood on the same community center stage where she'd first spoken truth to power. But this time, she wasn't fighting corruption or defending her right to love across class lines. This time, she was announcing the birth of her daughter. "Victoria Williams Cole," she said, holding up the tiny bundle that represented their future, "will grow up in a world where her parents proved that ordinary people can create extraordinary change, where love empowers instead of diminishes, where the person holding your coffee might be holding your future." So what would you do if someone saw your potential before you believed in it yourself? Would you fight for love that breaks every rule or let society's expectations win? Hit that like button if you believe in love that empowers. Subscribe for more stories that prove ordinary people can create extraordinary change. Tell me in the comments which moment in their journey inspired you most. And remember, the most powerful transformations happen when we stop accepting the limits others place on our hearts. Marcus and Richard proved that love isn't about rescue. It's about recognition. It's about seeing someone's strength and helping them see it too. What would your love story look like if it was built on mutual empowerment instead of need? Share your thoughts below, and let's keep this conversation going.